Well, today I managed to dissect another ham, and it's all here. It was a spiral slice ham, so it was quite a bit easier to do until I got to the bone, which has, they only get so far. And I'm gonna put this part here in the freezer as one great big ham. And then most of this stuff I'm gonna cut up because I like to have a lot of chopped ham. But as usual, I have this ham bone here, and I'm gonna put that in my Instant Pot. I'm going to cover that with water, and I'm going to make another ham broth. I really loved that potato soup, so I'm probably going to make that again. Dinner tonight's going to be super simple. I'm going to do grilled cheese with ham sandwiches. The guys will have macaroni and cheese. I'll have some steamed broccoli with it. Yesterday was pretty easy too. I made hamburgers, which I didn't eat the bun, but I had a hamburger, and then some air fried fries, or really roasted potatoes, kind of a cross between the two. But meal prep doesn't have to be a great big thing. I used those burgers that I had already prepped before, so I just tossed them in there. They were still frozen, and made dinner. And this will be broken down into several meals as well, put in my freezer, because I probably won't get ham again on sale until like Thanksgiving time. Once I'm done making broths, in this case ham broth, I like to strain it out, take all the bits out, pick out the meat that I want to save and things like that. And then I put it in a container. I try to use a jar if possible, just because it makes more room in my refrigerator. And I let it sit at least overnight. What that does is it allows all the fat to come to the surface so you can scrape it off. In this case, this is the ham, fat from the ham that I just finished. And I'm telling you, this is free, delicious flavor. Don't waste it. I just take a jar, and you can see I've been using some. And as long as you don't get any of this broth in there, it'll last pretty much forever in your refrigerator. So what I like to do is sometimes it'll come out whole like this, and you could take it out, and I'll strain it really, really, really well. And I'm going to do that for a minute here. Try to get as much liquid out as possible. You can remelt it if needed, but the water comes out pretty quick. Sometimes I blot it just to make sure to get most of it. This wasn't as thick as the last one, so I was able to take that off in layers. And then I simply save it in my jars. If you're worried about it, you could put it in the freezer in small, sometimes I'd use it like in ice cube trays. And then it could just pop out and use a little bit at a time. And tonight I'm going to be using some, because I'm going to be making scalloped potatoes with ham. And I saute my vegetables in it. You can use it to make a roux, which is what I'm going to do. A roux is just simply a fat with some flour, and you let that cook for a minute, and then you thicken it up. Use it to thicken up broths and milk or whatever you want to use. In this case tonight, I'm going to scrape this part off to use in my roux, because I will definitely get some liquid in here. But I just wanted to show you guys, this isn't as clean and nice as my last batch, because like I said, it was much thicker in there. So this stuff I probably will put in my ice cube containers. I just wanted you to see that it turns out it's like lard, you guys, except it's flavored. And you can use it in so much. Anything you would use bacon fat in, you can use this in. Anything you want a little bit of salty flavor to, this is what you use it for, because there's a good amount of salt in ham. Anyway, another thing that you could save, adds so much flavor. If all you have is potatoes, you could saute them in this, and it will just change it completely. You could use it as the fat when you mash potatoes and get a whole different flavor. So take a simple ingredient and turn it into something delicious. These trays with the silicone bottoms are perfect for this, because it allows you to push them out easier. But here you go. I have 4 meals that I can flavor with this ham fat, and I still have everything in my jar left. So anyway, once again, save that flavor. I thought I'd show you one way I'm going to use some of this ham fat in here, which you can see in my pan. And I'm just going to turn on my stove and let that begin to melt. because I'm going to use it to make a roux. I'm going to be making some scalloped potatoes with some of that ham that I picked off the bone. This meal is dirt cheap because I was able to pick up potatoes for $5 or 5 pounds for $1, and I'm only using a couple of pounds. The onion I had from the 25-pound bag that I buy once a year, and the ham is, in my opinion, free because most people would throw that away. So here I just have a little bit of onion, and I'm going to use some of the broth that we made and a little bit of milk. So I'm only going to be using a cup of milk, so that's, what, 30-40 cents itself. Otherwise, this meal is like super cheap. So first I'm going to saute. I want my onions to get a little bit translucent just because I don't want to use them raw. Well, I could. I mean, usually I sprinkle them raw between my layers because you have to bake it for a good hour and a half anyway, but I just, since I'm using them here, I'm just going to put them in there. And I'm just going to add, since I have it, normally I would use like garlic powder, but I have some of this garlic in the jar, or the garlic. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that. I just want to get to the point where I could start to smell the garlic, because if you cook it too long, it's going to burn. And you can see my heat is up pretty high. Let me spin that around. Okay, my onions are already getting a little bit translucent. So in order to turn this into a roux, I need to add approximately equal parts of flour to the fat. Okay, and I only had a couple of tablespoons of the fat, so I'm going to add roughly 2 tablespoons of the flour. At this point, it's going to look weird because it's going to clump up really bad, but that's okay. That's what it's supposed to do. And you just cook it for a minute or so. It takes out some of that raw flour flavor. In my case, that doesn't matter because I'm going to be baking this anyway. But you would want to cook this if you're going to be using it for like a gravy or something like that. You're going to want to cook it for just enough to get some of that flour browned lightly. To that, I'm going to add about a cup of my ham broth, a little at a time, because I want to incorporate that flour. In my case, because I'm not using nonstick, it does stick a little bit to the bottom, but as soon as I start adding the liquid, it comes up. So you can see it's already incorporated into that flour. And this is kind of where I usually cook it a little bit more to get that raw flour out. Just works easier for me. I'm going to add a little bit more. Incorporating that. Now, if this is all I added to it, I would have a nice ham broth gravy here. But because I'm putting it on scalloped potatoes, I'm going to add a little bit of milk. Honestly, I think this would be delicious without the milk, but I have some that needs to get used up, so I'm going to use it. All right, so I'm just going to stir in the rest of my broth and get that fully incorporated before I start adding my milk. The one thing to remember when you're doing scalloped potatoes, the potatoes have a good amount of starch, so I do not make this, I don't want it to be super thick, so if it's a little on the thin side, it will probably thicken up a little bit once you put it over your potatoes. Bring this back up to the boil pretty good here, so I can slowly start adding my milk. Once you cook this enough, any lumps that are in it, they'll go away. The lumps that you see now are just bits of onion. I could slowly start incorporating my milk. Actually, I could dump it all in if I want, but I do it 1/2 at a time just to get it fully incorporated. When I'm making broth like this or gravies or whatever, this is where I would season it with salt and pepper, but I do not want to add any salt until after this is thickened because I want to taste it. because that ham broth is already pretty salty. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm just going to add a little bit of pepper. Quite a bit of pepper. And that's pretty much my sauce that's going to go over my potatoes. If it's not enough, you can always add a little bit more milk or a little bit more broth to it. You want just enough to cover the top of your potatoes. So I'm going to let this thicken up for a couple of minutes just to get that really fully brought together here. Hopefully you could see this well enough. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of my ham fat to grease this pan. You could use butter, or technically you don't have to, but I do because it keeps it from sticking and it makes it easier for me when I'm washing up the pan anyway. And it's going to add a little extra flavor, obviously. So this is how easy this is, especially since I've already flavored the broth. If you didn't flavor your broth, you're going to want to add salt, pepper, and things like that. These are the pieces of the potato that are a little bit thicker. I just throw them on the bottom because my mandolin doesn't get all the way down to the bottom. Of course, you could cut these by hand. Doesn't matter, however you slice them. You could do it with diced potatoes. You could use frozen diced potatoes if that's what you want. Shredded potatoes. I'm going to put a layer of potatoes. Generally, if I was just going to use milk in here and I didn't flavor my broth, I would just put a little salt, pepper in between each layer, maybe some garlic powder, some onion, whatever flavors you like. It's just a good way to make an inexpensive meal that's very filling and tasty. Now this is the ham that I took off the bone, and I'm going to use half of it in this recipe, and the other half's going to go back in my soup. So once again, this was something that if you just didn't boil up that bone, it would have just got all thrown away. And I got more than a pound, well over a pound of meat, because I have some in another bowl yet for another thing I'm going to be using. So there's some of my ham. Once again, another layer of potatoes. And you just keep doing this till you get to the top and you finish off with some potatoes. It's that simple. I'm going to put this, after I'm done, it goes in I put it in my toaster oven. That's why I'm using a smaller pan. And I bake it at 350. It takes a good hour and a half to get done, depending on how thick your potatoes are. But that's how we're going to do this today. And if you like cheese, you could do this almost like a loaded potato. You could add cheese in between the layers. It's pretty endless what you can use. I've done mushrooms. I've shredded zucchini into it. You can hide cauliflower in it. Anything that kind of blends in. If your kids, or in my case, my brother doesn't like certain foods, I could go ahead and hide them in between. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, I might just add just a little bit of cheese because I really like cheese. And I've got some low-fat cheese, and my diet allows me to have some extra calories today. All right, even though the meat was cooked, I did wash my hands because I'm going to stick my hands in. I'm just using whatever cheese I have, and this is what I have. And I'm just going to make a layer, not real heavy, but this is finely shredded, so you can use a little bit more. Just going to add a little bit in between. And then I'll save some for the top layer. Okay, at this point, I'm just going to add a little bit of my gravy sauce here, or my scalloped potato sauce. It will work its way down to the bottom, so don't worry if you forget, and you can just put it on the top. Just kind of adds a little bit in between. Put some of those onions and stuff in between the layers. And then I'm just going to finish this off with my last few potatoes here. Once it's done, I'll give you a quick peek at it, hopefully, if I remember before we eat. A lot of times, by the time I get that far, I think about it after. But anyway, quick, easy meal. I would say the entire dish here probably cost me about $1. by the time you figure in the milk. Really, and well, if I didn't use the cheese, it would be even cheaper. But it's a good, you could use this as a side dish. If you don't have ham, scalloped potatoes are a good way to make a side dish. If you're doing like a meatless Monday, just make the potatoes with cheese, more like an au gratin potato. You could add some lentils to it, or puree up some white beans. Would be, you could hide those in there if you need to hide them from your family, or if you just want a creamier texture. But scalloped potatoes are one of my favorite inexpensive, versatile little dishes that I like to make. All my scalloped potatoes are done. In the last 5 minutes, I just added another little quarter cup or so of that cheese blend stuff I had. And I was able to go out to the garden and get some asparagus for the first time this year for my meal, because the guys won't eat it. But there you go. Simple, quick, delicious meal. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you want me to continue this series. I never know what people like. And if you do, then I'll continue it and show you what else I eat and meal prep to maintain my weight loss.